Thank you for joining me today. What we are witnessing in the Middle East right now is not merely another tragic chapter of violence. It is the loud, thunderous sound of global power shifting before our eyes. The reported ultimate strike, 100,000 missiles launched from Yemen and striking targets across Israel, has sent shockwaves through every capital on earth. But the real question we must ask is why this happened, what it reveals about the global system we live in, and where we go from here. The world watched in stunned silence as reports emerged that Yemen had launched a staggering 1,000 missiles toward Israel, a moment that shattered assumptions about military capability, regional power, and geopolitical control. This was not just another flashpoint in the Middle East. It was a full-scale statement of defiance, a move that stunned analysts and intelligence agencies alike. How could a nation battered by years of conflict, economic ruin, and foreign intervention orchestrate such a massive and coordinated strike? That question alone is rewriting the political narrative across the globe. From the first wave of launches, the message was clear: Yemen was no longer playing defense. It was projecting power, sending a chilling reminder that desperation can become the ultimate weapon in geopolitics. The missiles targeted key Israeli military and infrastructure sites, overwhelming defense systems, and forcing Israel into an unprecedented state of alert. For years, Israel's advanced air defense technology, including the Iron Dome and Arrow systems, was seen as nearly impenetrable, a symbol of Western-backed superiority in the region. Yet, as multiple interceptions failed to neutralize the storm of incoming projectiles, the myth of invincibility began to crack. International observers immediately recognized that this strike went far beyond regional rivalry. It was a symbolic turning point, a shockwave that rippled from Tel Aviv to Washington, from Riyadh to Moscow. News outlets rushed to cover the event, financial markets trembled, and military strategists began recalculating everything they thought they knew about Middle Eastern deterrence. What Yemen unleashed was not only military firepower, but psychological warfare, a demonstration that power no longer flows in one direction. It was, in many ways, a statement against decades of political domination and economic strangulation. And yet, the sheer scale of the operation raises deeper questions. How did Yemen, a nation under blockade and economic collapse, manage to coordinate such precision? Was it a signal of new alliances forming beneath the surface? Were other global powers indirectly shaping this retaliation to challenge Western influence? The uncertainty only adds to the tension, keeping the world guessing what comes next. Every missile launched carried a message beyond its explosive payload. It was a loud declaration that the marginalized can still alter the global equation. Whether one views it as an act of war, resistance, or desperation, one truth remains: the geopolitical landscape has changed forever. In that fiery spectacle across Israeli skies, the balance of fear and power took on a new, unpredictable shape, and the world is now forced to reckon with it. The recent missile strike from Yemen that unleashed 1,000 projectiles toward Israel has become far more than a regional military confrontation. It has become a global signal of shifting power. What we are witnessing, as Prof. Richard Wolff argues, is not simply a battle of weapons, but a battle of systems, of influence, and of who gets to define power in the modern era. The traditional hierarchies of geopolitics, once firmly in the hands of Western powers, are beginning to crumble under the pressure of new emerging forces determined to rewrite the rules of engagement. This is not just a conflict between two nations, it is a confrontation between two worlds, the established order and those determined to challenge it. For decades, the Middle East has been seen as a theater of dependency, where smaller nations served as pawns in the grand chessboard of global powers. But this time, the script is being torn apart. Yemen, long considered one of the poorest and most devastated countries in the region, has demonstrated a level of strategic sophistication that caught the world by surprise. The audacity of launching such a massive offensive against a highly fortified and technologically superior nation sends a message far beyond the battlefield. It is a declaration that global power is no longer unipolar. The era of Western dominance, militarily and economically, is meeting its loudest challenger yet. Every missile fired carried not just explosive potential, but symbolic weight. It told the world that resistance, no matter how improbable, can manifest when nations reach their breaking point. In this sense, the strike from Yemen to Israel wasn't merely about retaliation, it was about recognition. It forced policymakers, analysts, and governments across the globe to acknowledge that influence and control are no longer dictated solely by the traditional centers of power. This event underscores a truth that many in Washington, London, and Brussels would rather ignore. The world is entering a new phase of multipolar tension where smaller actors can now command global attention. Prof. Wolff captures this moment as a turning point in the architecture of global authority. The balance of power, once so carefully constructed through alliances, sanctions, and economic control, is beginning to tilt. Yemen's strike shattered the illusion of stability that Western powers had long maintained in the Middle East. And as the smoke clears, one thing becomes undeniable. Control is slipping, and a new world order is beginning to take shape before our eyes. As the news of Yemen's unprecedented missile barrage against Israel spread, the world's financial and economic systems began to tremble. The shock was immediate and far-reaching, rippling through oil markets, trade networks, and global investment corridors. What began as a regional military escalation quickly evolved into a global economic event. Prof. Richard Wolff described this moment as an economic aftershock of war, one that exposed just how fragile and interconnected the global financial structure has become. In a matter of hours, energy prices surged, shipping routes through the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden faced severe disruption. And investors scrambled to predict the next move in a region already fraught with instability. Oil, the lifeblood of the global economy, became the first casualty of panic, with Yemen strategically located near the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, a narrow but vital choke point through which nearly 10% of the world's oil supply passes. Traders feared immediate blockades and supply disruptions. Prices spiked dramatically as markets reacted to the possibility of a prolonged regional conflict. But the consequences didn't stop there. Global trade, already strained by inflation and post-pandemic instability, faced new bottlenecks. Insurance costs for cargo ships skyrocketed, and major energy companies started rerouting tankers away from potential conflict zones, adding days and millions of dollars in additional expenses. Prof. Wolff emphasized that the world's economic reaction to the Yemen-Israel escalation reveals a deeper truth. We live in an economy built on volatility. A single military event in a single corner of the world can now destabilize stock exchanges in New York, energy contracts in London, and consumer prices in Asia. This interdependence, he argues, is both a product and a flaw of global capitalism, where profit is prioritized over security and resilience. The same economic systems that enriched the powerful nations have now made them vulnerable to the very instability they helped create. Amid the financial chaos, ordinary people are once again the ones paying the price. Rising fuel costs, potential food shortages, and inflationary pressure are spreading across borders faster than the missiles themselves. The global elite may view the crisis through the lens of markets and numbers, but for workers and families around the world, It translates into harder lives, higher prices, and deeper uncertainty. The message is clear. When geopolitical tensions explode, the shockwaves hit the weakest first, and this time the tremor is shaking the entire global economy. Prof. Richard Wolff's analysis of Yemen's massive missile strike against Israel goes beyond the immediate headlines of warfare and retaliation. It exposes the deep and festering inequality that defines our global system. Beneath the smoke of explosions and the noise of political outrage lies a story of economic desperation, historical exploitation, and systemic imbalance. This was not simply a show of force, it was a cry from the margins, a manifestation of decades of injustice where wealth, power, and opportunity have been concentrated in the hands of a few nations, while others have been left to survive amid ruins. Yemen's act, though violent and controversial, has forced the world to confront an uncomfortable truth. When economic oppression continues unchecked, it eventually transforms into political resistance. For years, Yemen has stood as a symbol of neglect, ravaged by war, starvation, and economic isolation. It has been treated as a geopolitical pawn in the games of wealthier nations. Its resources, trade routes, and labor potential have been exploited, while its people suffered under poverty levels that defy imagination. Prof. Wolff reminds us that these conditions are not accidental. They are the outcomes of a global economic order that rewards domination and punishes independence. When he speaks of the economics of empire, he points directly to the structures that have enabled rich nations to profit from the misery of the poor. And now that system is facing a backlash it can no longer ignore. Every missile launch in this latest escalation can be seen, in Wolff's words, as a message written in fire, a desperate declaration from those who've been economically silenced for too long. The strike is not just about territory or defense, it's about visibility. Yemen, through its defiance, has forced itself back into the global conversation, demanding acknowledgement from a world that has looked away for too long. It is an act that symbolizes what happens when inequality reaches a boiling point, when people have nothing left to lose but the fear that once kept them silent. Prof. Wolff uses this moment to highlight the moral bankruptcy of a system that measures success through domination rather than justice. He argues that the strike is less about missiles and more about meaning. It is the explosion of a global truth that has been buried for decades. In the end, Yemen's defiance has become the mirror reflecting the world's collective failure to build equality, and the cracks in that reflection are widening with every passing day. Prof. Richard Wolff's reflections on Yemen's massive missile assault against Israel cut through the surface of military spectacle and dive into the deeper political and economic layers hidden beneath the explosions. He challenges the audience to look beyond the smoke, beyond the media's obsession with destruction, and to see what this event truly represents. Every missile fired, Wolff argues, carried not just metal and fuel, but a message, a declaration against decades of suppression, intervention, and manipulation. This was not only a military maneuver, it was a political earthquake that shook the foundations of how power, justice, and sovereignty are defined in the modern world. The question isn't just what happened, but why it happened now, and what it says about the unraveling order of global dominance. For years, Yemen has been written off as a nation too poor, too broken, too weakened to influence world events. Yet, in a single night, it shattered that perception. The act itself was a testament to resilience born from desperation, a moment when a cornered nation turned its suffering into strength. Prof. Wolff captures this paradox perfectly. When people are deprived of dignity and agency for long enough, Even the smallest act of defiance can ignite global awareness. The missiles may have targeted physical structures, but the true target was psychological. The idea that power is permanent, that the weak must always submit to the strong. That illusion has now been pierced. The professor warns that such events are not isolated outbursts, but inevitable consequences of ignoring the economic roots of conflict. You cannot impose inequality and expect peace. You cannot exploit nations through trade, sanctions, and debt and still believe stability will last forever. When the poor strike back, their message is often brutal because it's born from years of silence. And in that moment, they reclaim something far more powerful than territory. They reclaim visibility. Yemen, through its audacious move, forced the world to notice what it had long dismissed. Prof. Wolff's words resonate like an alarm bells. This is not merely about warfare, but about the breakdown of a global narrative. The strike represents a reckoning, a moment when the marginalized remind the powerful that control is never absolute. Beneath the thunder of missiles lies a truth that cannot be silenced. When justice is denied, resistance becomes inevitable, and even the smallest nation can shake the pillars of empire. Prof. Richard Wolff's final point resounds like a moral and intellectual thunderclap, a call to recognize that this conflict, this chaos, this moment of violence between Yemen and Israel is not an isolated event, but a warning to humanity. He reminds his audience that no empire, no system, no economy built on inequality can sustain peace forever. The missiles that lit up the Middle Eastern sky were more than weapons. They were signals of collapse, signs that the current world order, driven by greed and domination, is reaching its breaking point. In his words, we are witnessing not just a clash of nations, but the implosion of an unjust global structure that has long favored the few at the expense of the many. The hooks of history are catching up to those who ignored the suffering beneath their own prosperity. Wolff's voice cuts through the noise with a simple but unsettling truth. The world cannot bomb its way to stability. Decades of militarization, sanctions, and economic coercion have not created peace. They have only deepened resentment and desperation. Each conflict becomes a rehearsal for the next because the root causes, inequality, exploitation, and the relentless pursuit of profit, remain untouched. Yemen's strike, as shocking as it may be, is a symptom of this global illness. When nations, stripped of resources and dignity, decide to fight back, they are not just engaging in war, they are demanding recognition in a system that has deliberately erased them. Prof. Wolff's message is piercingly clear. Without systemic change, these eruptions of violence will only grow more frequent, more global, and more devastating. What the world is witnessing today is the inevitable consequence of ignoring justice for too long. The professor urges that the solution cannot come from more weapons or political deals, but from a radical rethinking of how we share power, wealth, and security. Real peace, he says, requires more than ceasefires, it requires equality. It demands that nations treat each other not as instruments of profit, but as partners in survival. His words linger like a warning and a plea. The old order is dying, but what replaces it will depend on our choices now. We can continue down the road of arrogance and control, or we can build a system rooted in fairness and cooperation. Yemen's missiles may have shattered the skies, but Wolff insists that what truly hangs in the balance is something far greater, the soul of global civilization itself. So what do we do with this moment? Do we treat it as another headline in a world growing numb to crisis? Or do we finally confront the deeper sickness, the inequality and domination that breeds endless conflict? Yemen's strike against Israel is not the end of a war. It is a symptom of a collapsing world order desperate for reform. History will remember this moment not for its firepower, but for what it revealed about who we are as a global society. We can continue down the road of retaliation and ruin, or we can begin, finally, to build a world based on mutual respect, justice, and economic equality. Thank you.